Good morning. Welcome to North Shore Unitarian Church, where our mission is to empower people to live with greater depth, meaning, and purpose. My name is Ryan Guenther, and I am serving as your Sunday Service Associate this morning. And what a day! This is the culmination of a process the search committee embarked upon almost a year ago. We conducted surveys and town halls to try to suss out exactly what it is you're looking for in a minister. And now our interpretation of all those desires and yearnings is manifested before you. We're supposed to start the service off with a little something about why we come to church, but honestly, on a day like today, how could you not come? I don't think I've ever seen this many people here before 10 a.m. But it is church, so settle down. There's a lot going on over the next week and beyond, so please note the announcements in your order of service and the schedule for candidating week on your green insert. And I would especially like to remind you of the performance coming up in a short 2 weeks of The Armed Man, A Mass for Peace, performed by nearly 100 Vancouver area singers and directed by our own Allison Nixon. So if you've ever wondered what our choir would sound like if it was 3 times as big, this is your chance to find out. It's a mass about the folly of war and violence and the human longing for peace. And it's on Saturday, May 11th at 7 p.m. at Highlands United Church. Tickets are $25, and proceeds will be donated to Amnesty International and the Canadian Centre for the Victims of Torture. You can buy your tickets after the service from Cindy, who you will be able to spot easily because she will be wearing a silly hat. I'd like to give an extra welcome this morning to any newcomers or visitors who might be with us today. We are glad that you're here. If you'd like to learn more about our community, I'd encourage you to sign in on the iPads out in the foyer. And if you have any questions about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism in general, any of our friendly greeters wearing greeter buttons would be happy to chat with you. And after the service, I invite everyone from longtime members to first-time visitors to come downstairs for coffee and tea, and this morning sandwiches, courtesy of Barb Moore and friends. And then I invite you to come back up here for 12:15 when there will be a Q&A with Ron. In this community, we celebrate people from all walks of life. No matter how you make your living or how you experience the sacred, no matter who you are or who you love, we hope you will feel welcome here. Please take a moment to set your cell phones to Elizabethan mode, as they should be neither seen nor heard. Now, let go of your cares and enjoy today's prelude. Good morning. Is this thing picking up my heartbeat? What's that? Okay. So I'm from Arizona right now, and as I was coming up here, I thought maybe I'll bring a little bit of sunshine up to the Pacific Northwest, and lo and behold, I mean, I can't really take credit for the sun, of course. I'm just saying it's a pretty big coincidence, so take from that what you will. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. And thank you to Ryan and all the search committee who worked so hard in order to manifest me, I think. I don't know, it feels interesting to be a manifestation. Feels good. So these are words written by a fellow named John Craigie. It's a miracle that you're here at all. When the universe feels like it's against you, just take a minute to realize all it took to make you.
Your parents had to meet, as random as that was, and hang out long enough at least to make some love and make a baby and give it your name. And all your ancestors had to do the same. Exponentially backwards to the start of life, so much had to happen just exactly right. Sparks had to catch. Oceans had to freeze. Billions of cells had to survive endless disease. Civilizations had to crumble. Wars had to be fought. Bad leaders had to get elected. Good leaders had to get shot. People had to leave. Hearts had to get broken. People had to die just so your eyes could open. The universe is not against you. The universe is not against you. It went through a lot just to give you a chance. It must have wanted you pretty bad. No pressure, though. No pressure, though. The universe went through a lot, but no pressure, yo. You don't got to be perfect. You don't got to be a saint. Just don't waste it. This was not a mistake. Oh, you're doing it wrong. If you're dissecting the bird, trying to find the song, it's a miracle that you're here at all. Amen. Rejoice. Come in. Will you sing with me? Let's stand and body or spirit and sing our opening hymn, number 361, in your gray hymnal, Enter, Rejoice, and Come in.
This is unquestionably a time of change, both for our congregation and for the larger world. Next week, you'll have the opportunity to vote on whether or not to call a new settled minister, and whichever way you choose, it will bring more change. Change, as the philosopher Heraclitus once said, is the only constant in life. Heraclitus also said, "No one ever steps in the same river twice." And I was recently involved in an online argument about that quote, where one particularly literal-minded man argued that, of course, it's the same river. The river is not the water. The river is what's marked on the map where it says Mississippi River. And being the type of person that I am, I replied with a picture of a map of all the different paths the Mississippi River has taken over the years since people have been recording it, which looked like a tangle of different colored yarn. Since I've been a member of this church, there have been 5 ministers, or 3 2/2, depending on how you count. Soon it'll be 6, and I am by no means an old-timer. Over that time, countless members have moved away or died or simply stopped coming, and new people have joined, not replacing the departed, but filling in the gaps. And despite all the changes, it's still the same church. It's just different. Our bodies are made up of cells, but not the same cells as yesterday. And those cells are made up of atoms, atoms which have existed for millennia and been part of plants and animals and the very earth itself, and before that, as the song said, stars. We are simultaneously a collection of transient components and transient components in a larger whole. And so this morning, I dedicate the lighting of our chalice to the hope that as our church changes, we will make it more of what we want it to be. We kindle this flame as a symbol of our gathering.
May the light of understanding illuminate our darkness. May the warmth of sharing bring us peace.
I invite you to join with me in a time of prayer or silent reflection as I read the words of John Daniel. Among other wonders of our lives, we are alive with one another. We live here in the light of this unlikely world that isn't ours for long. May we spend generously the time we are given. May we enact our responsibilities as thoroughly as we enjoy our pleasures. May we see with clarity. May we seek a vision that serves all beings. May we honor the mystery surpassing our sight. And may we hold in our hands the gift of good work and bear it forth whole, as we were born forth by a power we praise to this one earth, this homeland of all we love.
Unitarian Universalism is curious. I mean, we practice curiosity, but that's not exactly what I'm getting at. What I mean when I say that Unitarian Universalism is curious is that we're kind of odd. We're funny, we're peculiar in our disposition and our cultural positioning. I suppose you could say that our curiosity makes us curious. We're curious, odd, and peculiar because of our particular kind of hypocrisy. To be sure, in this case, hypocrisy is not so much a condemnation as it turns out to be an opportunity. And I'll describe it specifically in a bit, but for now, suffice it to say that in general, our values and principles give the impression that we are quite countercultural. And yet, in terms of general education, income, and wealth levels, and the underlying socioeconomic structures and norms that enable those levels, we are among the greatest beneficiaries of the cultural systems we often see ourselves as counter to. Curious, is it not? The fact is that you are not so much countercultural as we are early adopters. We tend to be on the leading edge of political and theological evolutions. Our ancestors were among the first religious traditions that dared to say both belief in God and Jesus as His Son were optional. We were the first to ordain women ministers in America in 1863. We performed same-sex marriages in the 1980s in the midst of the AIDS crisis. And we are proudly populated with gay, queer, and transgender clergy, and we continue to be leaders of justice work, fighting for the inclusion and rights of all marginalized people. And that is good, life-saving work. But it's not countercultural. We are cultural pioneers, not countercultural revolutionaries. And I'll give that the distinction there can be fuzzy at the margins, but at least in one instance, the distinction is clear, and it is identified by the hypocrisy that I mentioned earlier, and will explain in a moment. And it just happens to concern the fate of the most important thing you can imagine. Incidentally, what's the most important thing that you can imagine? Imagine it. It probably flashed for you when I said it, so recall that. You have that image in mind? What's the most important thing you can imagine? What's the most important thing you can imagine? Life. That's big. Well, that's what's at stake. That is what is at stake. The system in which we live and on which we depend, the system of which we have been among the greatest beneficiaries, is not sustainable. And it's nearing collapse. It's a system that is the natural outgrowth of a fundamental assumption. That assumption is that we are individual beings, not the descendants of stars, along with all we see, or components of a whole trajectory, but independent things, discrete from one another, personas disjoined from other personas, sensory machines, unconnected with a sensual world. In short, we are separate. My favorite contemporary philosopher, a guy named Charles Eisenstein, identifies ours as an age of separation, and that we are living in a story of separation. When we see ourselves as separate entities in a world of separate entities, everything is other. The ecosystem, the animal, the soil, each other, even our own selves become estranged. And in that understanding, in a cosmos where one's self is fragile, isolated, and alone, life becomes a zero-sum game. There are winners and there are losers, and no one wants to be a loser. Thus, the notion that we are separate gives rise to the sense of scarcity and the need for control. And those generate systems of societal and personal domination and oppression. Racism, patriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism. That's where we're living. And we have been for millennia, the story of separation and the domination paradigm. To systems generated by the story of separation, the world looks like a competitor or a commodity. You look like a competitor or a commodity. Your energy, body, space, exploitable as labor or capital or a threat. And nature is treated and has been treated the same, reduced from self-organizing systems, think of a tree, that are generous and resilient, to single-use systems that are defensive and fragile or hostile. A forest is seen as floors waiting to be sold. To a hammer, the world looks like a nail. And pretty soon everything gets smashed. So this reduction is clearly anti-life. It doesn't mean to be. It just is. Commodification selects for single use, single application. Sees the world reductively. Denies consciousness and spirit. Meanwhile, evolution, the life force, selects for increasing complexity, for molecules from cells, for life from molecules, for consciousness from matter, and I would say perhaps even for spirit. Speaking of denying the spirit, once upon a time, I went to business school. Now, they may light up the spirit of some folks, but not me. Anyway, one of the first two things that they taught us, I knew intuitively were wrong, although at the time I didn't know how to say so, and I was paying them a lot of money to tell me this stuff, so I didn't particularly feel like arguing. But one was that if you were a country that produced the best and most bananas, that you and only you should produce bananas and only bananas. I didn't know it then, but that was a recipe for fragility and an abdication of sovereignty. Any forest will tell you that strength lies in diversity. The other false lesson was that if you're not growing, you're dying. And that felt fatalistic and desperate even then. And it felt that way because that's exactly what it yields. That way of thinking yields death and desperation. And there is obviously a limit to growth, particularly in terms of commodities and capital. And we are now beginning to experience the limit. We are seeing it happen now. If the entire socioeconomic structure is predicated on constant growth when growth is no longer possible, it's a double whammy. For not only does it mean that the entire social economic structure is about to fail, it means that there are no more resources left. The growth or death model has consumed it all. Everything has been turned into a nail, and all nails have been hammered. Obviously, this is a crisis that threatens our world, our environment, but perhaps counterintuitively, the solution is not environmentally based. It's not a technical fix. For the source of the problem is not environmental limits. The source of the problem is us. Or more precisely, it's me. And it's you. It is that we have been taught to think of ourselves as separate from one another and separate from the world, reducing the world and its inhabitants, including each other, to commodities, competitors, or threats. And the problem, or the puzzle, is our identity. The puzzle is this: how do we transform our identities as discrete individuals in a world of other into identities that comprehend themselves as interdependent with all existence? That's not easy. How do we lay to rest the story of separation and the domination paradigm and live into the story of interbeing and develop a partnership paradigm? How do we cultivate inter-identities? When you see yourself as a complex entity made up of complex entities, enmeshed in a complex web of complex entities, the particulars of which are beyond our comprehension, when we see that, we will become a more graceful presence on this grace-granted planet. We will be more humble in our appetites, and our appetites will decrease, for appetite is often a function of scarcity, which is rooted in the feeling of separateness. We will feel more whole and less alone. We will live lives of greater depth, meaning, and purpose, for the living of them will not be for us alone. Living itself will be understood as an act of kinship with all. And even more with the systems and programs that support life. We can then respond to a universe whose yearning is our own. We will know in our bones that it is all one body, that we are human cells in one organ called humanity. And when we shift from the sense of separation to the sense of interbeing, our particular organ will cease devastating those organs around us, and the whole body may yet recover. When we see ourselves in each other's eyes, when we sense ourselves in each other's lives and the life all around us, we will know we are connected. You know what connection feels like? You do. It feels like love. It feels like home. So that's the vision. It's not a new vision. In fact, it's a wisdom that you have known in your hearts since you were a child. It's a wisdom that is inherent, a reflection of that voice within us that bears the imprint of our inherent worth and dignity. And it's simply the way the world already is, a way that we have been living in opposition to for millennia. It's a vision attested to in our principles. The seventh one, to be precise, the one about the interdependent web of existence, of which we are all a part. I think you've got it on the back of your order of service. You might want to look at it because here's where the hypocrisy comes in. We who are in so many ways the privileged pinnacle of the system brought about by the story of separation and the domination paradigm do affirm and promote the interdependence of existence. It says that in the preamble to the principles, and in true Unitarian fashion, we affirm it and promote it. And if we leave it at that, we can kiss it goodbye. And whatever earlier was the most important thing that you could imagine affirming and promoting, interdependence will close its eyes forever too. We can affirm and promote until the water subsumes the earth and it won't matter. Interdependence, interbeing cannot be just an idea. It has to be an experience. This is a growing edge for Unitarians. Experience. We're really good at ideas. I've given you some ideas. We're really good at ideas, but we need to shift from idea into experience. We need to have a new assumption about our reality, the story in which we understand who we are and how we are to act. And it is our task to bring that experience about. And I don't know how. I know it must be felt. It must be the way we see and think and understand. It must be an identity. And until then, all solutions will be band-aids that likely create further problems as they carry within them the source code of separation. Always looking for a solution to the problem, to the enemy, to the other. This isn't about the other. So how do we do that? How do we get from separation to wholeness? Maybe the first and most important response ought to be, I don't know. Humility is likely a necessary ingredient in this shift. That said, I have been applying some curiosity to a couple of practices of late that might help. They're my ideas, and I am hopeful that you also have some ideas. Mine are both sort of mantras. One is what I call the carbon rule, as distinct from the golden rule. It goes like this: what you do to others, you do to yourself. It's not so much a rule as an observation. What you do to others, you do to yourself. Of course, that sort of collapses the category of other anyway, so maybe it should say what you do to yourself. The other is a little meditation game I play, and I do this at any time, usually when I'm in line or waiting for something to occur. I wouldn't do it while you were driving. I look at whatever is around me and I think, I am of thee, and you are of me. And I do this to the stranger walking in front of me, and it changes me. Right there, something shifts. I do this to a chair, a cloud. I am of thee, and you are of me. To an animal or a tree, a car, to everything I see, to everything I sense, to the air. So that's an exercise you might want to play with. There's something else that we can do too. We can organize systems that seek to live into the partnership paradigm, systems not unlike the one in which you currently sit. So congratulations. You've taken the first step. And maybe even a step and a half, because by adopting that mission of living with greater depth, meaning, and purpose, as we've seen, that's what interbeing yields. Now, will this save the world? Preserve what is at stake? I don't know. It's a start, and we'll never get there if we don't make a start. And at least this way, the journey will be one of love. Interbeing recognizes that wholeness is not isolated completion, but connection. Wholeness is connection, and connection feels like love, understanding the world and all its inhabitants, not as commodities, but as beings of our heart, beautifully, deeply connected to our souls. I am of thee, you are of me. The universe is our home. Even grasp hands, connect with each other in some way as we prepare for our closing song. As we leave this sacred place that we have created together, this sacred time that we have crafted, remember, it's a miracle that you're here. We are one body. I am thee, and you are of me. This is our beautiful blue boat. Let's make it our home. Thank you for practicing with one another today. Go in peace.